department, then departments should respond accordingly. So I'm going to get off my soapbox, but just and turn to the rest of business before us. We are going to discuss items 1 and 2. I recommend putting items 3 and 4 on consent. I'd like to continue item 5 without objection to any of that. It looks like we have no public commenters. So we can go directly to consent, unless I'm missing someone from public comment. Awesome. So we're ready to vote on consent items? Will you please call the roll?
Okay, we're voting on items 3 and 4, Madam Chair.
Yes.
Okay. Okay, for items 3 and 4, we're taking the vote right now. Councilmember Yaroslavsky,
Yes.
Councilmember McCosker,
Yes.
Councilmember Rahman,
Yes.
Councilmember
I'm here now. Thank you.
Councilmember Blumenfield, Councilmember Hernandez.
Yes.
5 aye votes, and items 2, 3, and 4 are approved on consent.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. Turning out item 1, Mr. Sutton Wills, please, would you read that item into the record?
Item number 1 is a discussion item from the Los Angeles Department of Water and Power to report on the status of Mono Lake. Ms. Staff is present for your questions.
Thank you very much. So this item is a little bit different from most of the items we've heard since I started chairing this committee. There's no council file here, but there is certainly a very long, complicated history on the subject of Mono Lake and its relationship to the city of Los Angeles. Mono Lake represents so much in the city's water history, the city's history overall, environmental law and environmental activism. For those who've never visited Mono Lake, it's truly beautiful. It's up in the eastern Sierras. It's a saline lake with striking limestone features along a shoreline called tufa towers. It's home to brine shrimp, birds, and alkali flies, which make for a really unique ecosystem. Okay. Can we come back to that? Jesus Christ. Mono Lake also represents a harbinger of how managing our water system will be different in an era of the climate crisis. Recounting the lake's natural history and its role in modern water history would take us more time than we have today, so I just want to acknowledge that we can't fully do that history justice today, but I do want to explicitly acknowledge the Kutsadika's Paiute as the Mono Basin's original stewards since time immemorial. We're going to be hearing 2 verbal presentations on this item, the first from LADWP and the second from the Mono Lake Committee. We'll ask questions of DWP after they present, then we'll ask questions of the Mono Lake Committee after they present. So let's start, please, with DWP. Could you please come forward, DWP team? And I believe we have Mr. Perez joining us. Welcome, Mr. Perez.
Number 2.
Correct? So we don't have a
No report?
We have a report, but it's a verbal report.
Yeah, I was hoping you could give us just a little overview, a couple
Yes.
of minutes
Yep,
overview.
of course.
Thank you.
So yes, my name is Adam Perez. I'm the manager of the aqueduct. I'm also the assistant division director under the Water Operations Division in the water system. I live and reside in Bishop, California, managing the water supply for the city of Los Angeles and been up there for the last 5 years. So, the city of Los Angeles has a long-standing water right in the Eastern Sierra. It's both safe, affordable, reliable water supply for the residents and the ratepayers here in the city of Los Angeles. It's also the least intrusive in terms of energy. We also generate power. There's a hydro generation. Up to 120 megawatts of power is generated off of the Los Angeles Aqueduct, enough for roughly 90,000 homes here in the city. So following the California Supreme Court reconsideration for the water rights under the Public Trust Doctrine in 1994, the State Water Resources Control Board conducted a lengthy hearing to balance the public trust for Mono Lake. the Water Resources Control Board adopted Decision 1631, which established minimum in-stream flows and specific water diversion criteria intended to gradually restore the water elevation of Mono Lake to 6391. I want to pinpoint the 6391 as the elevation, the target elevation that went through that hearing discussion, and that's where, I'll refer to it several times in the presentation. But just to go back a little bit about the decision in 6391, what it does is it looks at the overall elevation of Mono Lake, and based on the elevation, that sets the amount of water that can be diverted from Mono Basin. So that's how the process works. So then you have, and ultimately, there's basically above 6380, which is again an elevation of the lake. Above that elevation to 6391, the city is allowed to divert 16,000 acre-feet of water, roughly enough for 200,000 Angelinos. Between 6377 to 6380, the overall license agreement allows the city to divert 4,500 acre-feet of water. And just to kind of put in perspective for this year, the elevation read by the DWP hydrographers in the Owens Valley, the elevation was 6379.99. And so it allowed for this year, we're looking at an elevation or export of up to 4,500 acre-feet. I think it's just important to kind of give you the reference of where we're at with water supply. So there have been significant improvements in the health of Mono Basin in regards to this decision, this order that has been in place, in regards to the fish, the overall habitat, streams, also the waterfowl. We've complied with Decision 1631, and overall, there basically have been restoration orders, 9805, 9807, and these are all for the benefit and the health of the overall waterfowl and as well as the streams within Mono Basin. Overall, these safeguards have been resulted in overall elevation gains in Mono Lake. When you look at other saline terminal lakes, overall you can see there's been a decline in their elevations, where Mono Lake is actually, when you look at the history, it's actually been, the elevation has actually been rising and gaining for Mono Lake. So the health and conditions we feel for Mono Lake, and based on the overall elevations as well as looking at the conditions assessments, are in the positive trend for Mono Basin. When you look at overall, the Mono Lake Committee lobbied the State Water Resources Control Board here recently, just this past year, in regards to emergency action for Mono Lake to basically look at the lake, to basically look to the City of Los Angeles to restrict its overall diversions from the Mono Basin area. And with that, for the workshop, we had multiple letters were written and submitted for various agencies requesting that the State Water Resource Control Board take a more holistic approach at this resource. Because overall, when you look at curtailing Mono Lake and overall that water diversion, what it does is it puts stress on other supplies within the state, such as the State Water Project as well as the Colorado River. And for this, and I'm going to read this list here because there was a lot of letters that were basically sent on behalf of the city over to the State Water Resource Control Board. They were from NWD, State Water Contractors, Southern California Water Coalition, City of Glendale, Inland Empire Utilities Agencies, Las Virgenes, LA County Department of Public Works, Upper San Gabriel Valley District, Callegas. There was also a letter from BizFed, who represents 410,000 LA County employers. So it was quite an effort and discussion. And then just to get into overall the lake level rise, I just want to discuss that for a minute. When you look at what really impacts the lake level rise at Mono Lake, it has to do a lot with its hydrology. And hydrology and the watershed is dependent on the climate. And so what we've been going through since the decision in 1994 have been a series of these longer periods of drought with these significant booming water years, such as the current water that we're in. And you can also look at 2017 as another big water year. So you get these long periods of drought, then you get these big water years. And when you look at overall, for example, like last year, the overall elevation rise of Mono Lake based on, essentially our diversions, if you would have basically had removed our diversion from last year, the lake would have risen less than 1 inch. So that's the impact that our diversions have on Mono Lake. Really, when you look at it, it's really the impacts come down to climate change. And one of the big things, if you look at like this year is a historic, substantial watershed, amount of precipitation within the Eastern Sierra watershed. The lake elevation is looking to rise 3 to 4 feet. So you can see how there's a big significant difference compared to our diversions compared to the overall aspects related to the hydrology. So another thing to consider is the timing of the exports. I think this is a really big piece, because even though right now we are dealing with a significant snowpack runoff, which I'll come into the next item, about how much water is available in Eastern Sierra, really what it comes into is when we look at our Mono Basin export is the timing of when the export is taken. So right now, like I mentioned earlier, we have up to 4,500 acre-feet of water to divert from Mono Basin. That water will be taken, not now, but will be taken in October. And why it's done in October, and that's a very important piece of this, is because in October, we actually are looking at forecasting the planning year for next years, trying to secure the water's overall supply for the city. And why that's done that way is by having the ability to look at water, the planning for the next year. When we look at right now the forecast, we're actually looking at drought conditions being forecasted for the next water year. So this water, either the 4,500 or up to the 16,000 acre-feet, allows for the better planning of our water supply for the next water year. It's not for this water year, because this water year we actually have, again, a very historic watershed or water overall forecast and what we're dealing with right now within the Eastern Sierra. When it comes to conservation in the city of Los Angeles, really it comes down to, the ratepayers, the Angelenos have done a great job in regards to conservation for the overall city. We have a reduction in water use of 44%, even though the population has gained by over 1 million individuals here, Angelenos, in the city of Los Angeles. And those were basically on water recycling. We have stormwater projects, we have groundwater cleanup projects, and all those things have basically been handled. But overall, just to kind of put it into perspective, even though we are working towards these big conservation projects, the Los Angeles Aqueduct is, again, the foundational supply for the city of Los Angeles. Safe, reliable, and affordable, and the best in regards for the city. Lastly, just in regards to the Southern California water supply, I just wanted to kind of get into the aspects of, again, this water that comes out of Mono Basin, if we have to replace this water, it will put a strain on other resources within the overall state water system. So you look, again, the state water supply from the State Water Project, as well as constraints and strains on the Colorado River Project or water. So having this water and reliable this water into the system as per the amended license, as we have been doing, really does give the city of Los Angeles this basically the ability to bring this water into the system, again, up to 200,000 Angelenos every year. So that's the benefit of it. Again, it's a very important piece of our water supply and our water right. Again, allows us for the ability to have this ability for planning for the next water year, because we really never know, because according to the forecasters, we were supposed to be in another drought this year, and this year we're looking at historic amounts of water, which again, I'll present in a few minutes. So with that, that's the report in regards to the Mono Basin supply.
Thank you very much, Mr. Perez.
Yeah.
I have a few questions, and then I'll turn it over to colleagues. So as you know, the council has adopted a motion seeking a report on DWP's efforts to reduce purchased or imported water, to increase our local water supply. You just touched on some of the ways we're working hard to increase local water supply. This won't only make our system more resilient, but it'll could reduce impacts on Mono Lake and the Owens Valley. While that report is not yet complete, would you describe a little bit more detail, flesh out a little bit more what DWP is doing in this regard to make us more independent water-wise?
Yeah, I mean, I think that, as I touched on it just briefly, was conservation. I was trying to be mindful of my time. So, but in regards to, I think one of the biggest projects we have right now is Operation Next, and that is really to look at taking all the local water and basically go through the recycled water, take that and put that right back into the system. It's a big, large project. It'll be taking several years, but right now we are aggressively moving towards working this with Operation Next. But prior to Operation Next, I mean, we also have the different turf removal projects that we've been going through, as well as when you look at stormwater capture. I mean, overall here in the city, as it has in the Eastern Sierra watershed, there's been lots of storms. We are right now ramping up and trying to utilize as much as that stormwater and developing projects for the stormwater capture. I think this year we used up to 90,000 acre-feet of water that was basically captured, which was basically then infiltrated into the system, which will at one point will be used to pull out for use as water supply. So there, and then we also have active projects in the San Fernando Basin, And these are basically trying to overall clean up the overall, the water has been contaminated. There's these big projects to overall bring the water to the surface, go through some major filtration treatment systems, and then to begin to use that water for a local supply. So there's a big push for local supply. There's also the big push for Operation Next. And those are the big aspects. But again, when it comes down to it, the city right now, we're looking at about 75 to 80% of the water supply to the city is going to be coming from the Eastern Sierra this year. And that's a big deal because there is so much water, and and right now we have it. Again, it's a paid-for system, so that water is being brought towards the city, and that will be used for supply for the city.
Thank you. A couple more. I sent a letter of support to DWR, supporting DWP's application for over $100 million for the Urban Community Drought Relief Grant Program. Can you tell me the status of those applications and whether we received or are likely to receive grant funds for these purposes?
I'm sorry, Councilwoman, I don't not exactly, but I can bring that information back to you. I'm just not aware of exactly the status of that information.
That's totally fine. Just more broadly speaking, then, how do water conservation activities in LA impact Mono Lake? That is there a direct relationship between water conserved locally and changes in diversion rates in the Mono Basin?
Can you repeat that one more time? Sorry. So the question is, how directly do the conservation efforts within the city impact
Our need to draw down Mono Lake.
For Mono Lake, yes. Okay. I mean, the conservation efforts within the city, I think, overall impact the whole water supply from not only just Mono Lake, but the whole Eastern Sierra, correct, right? So what we have is we have several amounts we have obligations, projects that we have in the Eastern Sierra that we provide water to, but overall, we're trying to maximize and also bring the water down to the city. And so in a year like last year, when it was very tight and constrained on the overall water supply, we basically were able to meet the obligations within the overall the Owens Valley, as well as, again, complied with the order. And I think a lot of it has to do with the amount of conservation that was done and basically minimizing the overall uses within the city. So you're able to balance off because we were, being restricted by the State Water Project in terms of the amount of water there. We had a limited amount of water supply from the city. Those conservation efforts really did help out with the overall portfolio for the city and its water supply.
Just two more questions. Why do you believe that the lake level target set by the State Water Board for Mono Lake hasn't been met despite the agreements in place?
I think, again, I'm going to go back to, I think it comes down to when they went through the hearing process, and they went through and they had the, different parties came in, different modeling, different looks at what was happening at Mono Lake. I think one thing no one really thought through was the amount of drought years and then these booming years. I think that type of climate kind of watershed and management makes it really difficult. And I think, like, for example, this year, the lake is going to rise 3 to 4 feet. But when you look at it, if we had these types of years and then next year was a normal year or significant types of these years, the lake would continue to rise. And we probably would have hit the 6391 target. I think that's been really the big story there. But the problem has been is that then you get into these long drought periods, these 3 to 4 years. And one thing lost is that every year on Mono Lake, because of the surface area, because of the alkaline water, you basically evaporate 150,000 acre-feet of water, and just in evaporation alone. Remember, our export is 16,000 acre-feet at max at this point. The 4,500 acre-feet is right now what we're currently under our order, what we're allowed to export. So we really look at it, it's really these long periods of these droughts with these booming years have not really helped out to get us to these points. And I think that's why when you look at all the different letters that were sent, it's really to look at a holistic approach to provide the climate change information into the new modeling to then look at how we can overall get to the targets elevations that were set in 94. Because I don't think when they looked at 94 that they would conceive these so many years of droughts, and then these big booming water years. Because I think that if they would have considered that, I think we would have had maybe different targets, different information to consider.
So you mentioned the State Water Board a couple of times. Can you just explain what their role is generally?
So the State Water Resources Control Board, they manage the water rights, and they basically have provisions, and they will be able to, in this case, they would be able to amend our water right for considerations. And so in this case, they're the ones that have the ultimate say in regards to our diversions. And we just recently, they amended our license for basically for exports. And what they did, they didn't change the criteria for the export out of Mono Lake. What they did is they added some added flow information for the overall health of Mono Basin and the watershed on Rush Creek. And so there's a project associated with that called the Grant Lake Spillway Modification Project. And overall, the State Water Resource Control Board, again, has amended the license. They have not changed the diversion criteria, but they did add on an aspect for the stream health of Rush Creek. So that's how the State Water Resource Control Board, they're overall managing overall the water right for the health of looking at and basically balancing the public trust, looking at overall the uses for the overall for the water right for the users, as well as looking at overall the health of overall the ecosystem, as well as looking at other aspects such as air as well.
Thank you very much, colleagues. Questions? Councilwoman Hernandez.
Thank you, Chairwoman. Thank you, Mr. Perez, for your presentation. Can you tell us, please, what percentage of the water LADWP requires to serve residents/customers across the city is coming from Mono Lake?
Yeah, that's a great question. So roughly, we look at it's about a 2 to 4% is what is basically being able. I talked about it at max. It's 16,000 acre feet of water. That 16,000 acre feet is roughly, when you calculate it out, is roughly enough for 200,000 Angelinos. So it is a considerable amount of water for the overall use of the city. Replacement cost for that water has been estimated at roughly $44 million when you look at how much it would take to bring that water from other resources. And again, I talked about the strain on the other supplies and how this would impact those supplies.
Thank you. And second question is, what percentage of water was conserved when we first went into the emergency, putting us in phase 3?
I'm sorry, Councilman Hernandez, I don't have that exact information. I can bring that back, though.
That'd be great.
Yeah,
Thank you.
yeah.
Thank you, Chairwoman.
Colleagues? Councilman McCosker.
Thank you very much for being here. Really appreciate the presentation. I concur with the line of questioning from the chair, the importance of conservation and the opportunities for us through further conservation efforts to put ourselves in a position where we have even less reliance on outside sources of water. With any successful conservation program, and we have had some success over decades, is education. And I'm particularly moved by the stories especially from folks in my community, from communities from Better Environment, talking about the trips with the Mono Lake Committee up to Mono Lake, where we create opportunities for folks from particularly vulnerable communities, vulnerable on water, vulnerable on air, but particularly communities that have the most to lose should we have limited water resources. I would just urge DWP, tell me about the DWP relationship with those trips, those valuable opportunities for folks in my community to visit the lake and understand the importance of conservation here so that we can protect such a beautiful asset.
Yeah, so I think the city of Los Angeles, we support Mono Lake Committee in regards to where the education center is, where the residents of Los Angeles go. That is actually a DWP lease. And the house and how it's being utilized is all, but so it is under the city of Los Angeles. We are not direct educators under that program. So I don't have a direct, part of that education. But basically for us, it is what we kind of do and how we work through issues in the Eastern Sierra. I believe right now we have a strong informational kind of campaign in regards to making sure that Angelinos can find information about what we are doing in regards to our project. It's a great website, LADWPEasternSierra.com, where you can find out work and projects that we are doing in regards to associated with our obligations as well as some of the work we do. But again, for that direct component with the Mono Lake Committee, we're not educators, but we are part of in regards to that house and where the Angelos get to go. That is a lease that we have.
So we would have from your perspective today, we'd have a commitment to continue to participate in that program and strengthen that program. Should there be suggestions for doing so?
Yes. I mean, and I always, myself, my staff, We're involved with the U.S. Forest Service. They have a campaign in which they go out to do campfires, and so we're engaged with many aspects in relations to Eastern Sierra and education. Any chance that I have, I'm out myself, going and making sure that the information is presented correctly in the way, and also can balance the city of Los Angeles, the water right, as well as the environment of the Eastern Sierra, because it is very important.
Thank you. It strikes me that there will be no end to the need for education on the importance of conservation, the importance of protecting the resources, and limiting our reliance on the resources outside of the city. So
Yeah.
I thank you for that, and I would encourage you to continue to work with this committee to improve our programs.
Yes, of course.
Councilmember Bloomfield.
Thank you, and I appreciate all the lines of questioning. Just to be clear, there's conservation of Mono Lake efforts there, and then there's our overall water conservation efforts, very different, because we're going to divert as much as we legally can from Mono Lake each year, regardless of how much we conserve as a city. The key is the 66 programs, conservation programs you mentioned that are on your website, which have to do with what is happening at Mono Lake, right? And it's unclear to me, and I looked at the website, but where we are with all of that. So like how many projects are actually done? How many are in progress? How much money did it take to complete those projects? Are we spending enough on restoration? Basically, I'm trying to drill down on where we are with the actual restoration program for Mono Lake.
So the restoration, I'll make sure I'm very clear. So there's the obligation projects that are within the Owens Valley. Are you referring to the 66 that are under the long-term water agreement, or projects that are associated just with Mono Lake?
With Mono Lake.
Okay. So when you look at the projects for Mono Lake, again, when you look at the overall stream health, waterfowl health, when you look at the fish in the overall streams, the city of Los Angeles, we have a team of biologists, roughly 30 biologists that are just within the Owens Valley in the Bishop office. These individuals were, at one point, we were responsible for doing all the limnology, doing all the fish, counts, doing all the bird, waterfowl. We had a waterfowl director. So we were very much active in regards to all those different projects. So when we look at it, that's what I mentioned earlier, we feel that overall the health of Mono Basin, I think has significantly been changed since the overall order from D6391. I think that has definitely changed the overall course for Mono Basin. There's been active projects in regards to the stream health, putting in fish ladders and things like those. So I think there's been a lot of aspects related to the benefit of Mono Basin. In regards to Mono Lake, again, the diversion criteria, yes, you're right, are set by the overall State Water Resource Control Board and requirement per the overall license. And we basically look at it at diverting that water, like I said, this year, 4,500. Again, it's because we're looking at those, that's our water right, and per the license, we are allowed to utilize that water right. And again, it's for the benefit and the projections of the water supply for the next following year, because that is where it's important to make sure that we can provide the Angelinos with the water for the next water year.
Right, but if we were to be more successful with Mono Lake and get it beyond the 6380, it's very strange. It was at 6379.9 or whatever, somehow
Yeah,
right below the threshold that we would have gotten a whole lot more water.
this year.
I don't know if was that a coincidence or was that because of the way it's managed?
No, so it's all based on the overall, again, it comes down to the precipitation, the hydrology, overall the environment.
But,
So
but it's managed, it's not just,
Yeah, it's managed in that the only thing that we can do in regards, so just the explanation of it, there are feeder creeks that feed into Mono Lake. Our diversion is set off of two of them right now, and that's Rush Creek and Lee Vining Creek. So that essentially where we have it. So based on the elevation, we're able to divert off of those two creeks. And so that's what really was setting apart. So when you look at the overall health for this year in the 79.99, overall it came down to, we had, it was much lower coming into December. In fact, that's where the overall action by Mono Lake Committee was lobbying to the State Water Resource Control Board, because it was getting closer to that bottom end of the 6377. It was more like 6378. So there was a concern from the Mono Lake Committee that we would maybe get below some of those bottom targets, and there was concern about a land bridge formula. There was a whole complex behind it. But what has happened since then, we had overall the amount of precipitation, and we had a lot of rain events in December, January, and February, which really already caused about a foot and a half rise in Mono Lake just in that period of time. So right now, and I talked about it, just after this water year, we're looking to get 3 to 4 feet of elevation gain in Mono Lake, which would take us above the 6380, which means that by April 1 of next year, we will be back to the 16,000 acre feet of water to be exported out of Mono Lake, or Mono Basin.
Well, that's good. I'm interested also, though, in the efficacy of our dollars. So how much have we spent so far on this, and how far along we have a stewardship program, right, where we have a set amount that we want to do. Where are we in that process? Are we 80%, 50%?
In terms of the restorations, in terms of the watershed, I mean, I think there's most of the projects that we enacted under restoration orders, 9805, 9807, we've basically enacted most of the restoration orders. Again, talk about for the health and benefit. The exact dollars, it is significant dollars, but I don't have those dollars on top of, I'll have to provide those at a later point. But I believe in terms of success, I think there's been great success in regards to the work the City of Los Angeles has done in Mono Basin for the restoration of the stream and health. And I think it does show. Again, you will see when you get to some of these lingering drought years that you will be able to see some impacts associated with that. But that's nothing in regards to the City of Los Angeles, just because of the overall climate and the conditions within Mono Basin.
So are we spending enough on restoration? Are we getting the return on investment?
I believe so. I believe that based on our efforts and what we've done, I think there is significant, I'd love to show you the differences between, I wasn't able to provide a presentation today, but there is the ability to show a significant difference between 1994 to what it looks like today, and the amount of effort and what is taken to get there, and looking at the overall change in the overall ecosystem in Mono Basin has been very, very significant.
Yeah, no, and I've seen some of the pictures, and it's very cool to see how
Yeah.
it's changed. But I try and also get a handle on the efficacy, the dollars, how much have we spent, and I know you'll get that, and are we getting what we anticipated out of it? Obviously,
Yeah.
you can't just measure the overall water level, because as you said, that has to do with Mother Nature more than anything else. But we had a restoration plan.
Mm-hmm.
We have a certain amount of that plan that we are doing. And it sounds like you're saying we're pretty much have done it. Are we like 90+% of the way?
I believe in regards to the city's obligation, what we've done in regards to the restoration is pretty much complete. Again, when we had restoration orders, we worked towards those. And then when you look at what we're now part of, it's called the Monitoring Assessment Team, which Mono Lake Committee is part of as well, CDFW, CalTrout. And we have the Monitoring Assessment Team. What they do is they look at the conditions of the overall, the fish population, the limnology in the lake, they look at the streams, and they also look at the fish population. So the waterfowl. So you're able to balance out all these things. So we are able to every year progressively continue to look at the overall health of the ecosystem, and that is done, and we are part of that team. Again, it's this Monitoring Assessment Team, the MAT, and we're able to look at overall. So we are able to track and look at these things. But in terms of our investments and what we've done, I believe it's a dramatic change, and we've made a significant improvement and change to Mono Basins, again, since that 1994 decision was put in place to where we are today.
Okay, great. Thank you very much.
Yeah.
Colleagues, anyone else? Thank you so much. Really appreciate you being up here. Next, I'd like to call on the Mono Lake Committee. But before I do that, I just want to say, for the record, I want to acknowledge that we had 2 names registered late for public comment that came in after we closed public comment. I don't believe those individuals are here. So we're going to just move on. So let's move to the Mono Lake Committee. We have here Jeffrey McQuilkin, Executive Director of the Mono Lake Committee, Martha Davis, a board member of the Mono Lake Committee, and Mark Lopez from East Yard Communities for a Better Environment, one of the committee's partners. Welcome.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon. I'd love to have you to give us a presentation?
We've brought some slides.
Awesome,
And
great.
look forward to talking this afternoon. We really appreciate the opportunity to be here and address the committee today. Thank you for the introduction. I'm Jeff McQuilkin. I'm the Executive Director of the Mono Lake Committee. We're a 16,000-member nonprofit organization. We were founded back in 1978 to protect and restore Mono Lake and its tributary streams, and to share these special places with youth and the visiting public through education programs. And we have a long history of working with the City of Los Angeles on collaborative solutions in pursuit of a sustainable shared future together. So Mono Lake, as you can see in the image, is a vast inland sea. It's a wonderful place to visit. Hoping we get to see you up there. If Mono Lake was transported here to Los Angeles, we might be sitting on one shoreline here, and out at the beach in the Santa Monica area would be the other side of the lake, just to give you a sense of the scale that we're talking about. Many exceptional ecological, cultural, recreational, and scenic values at the lake. And I could easily take you on an hour-long slideshow journey about migratory and nesting birds that depend on the lake for food and shelter, or the unique tufa towers and recreational experiences that provide awesome experiences for Angelinos and folks from around the world, or even dive into the Mono Lake legal history. But you've asked for a status update, and I will jump right in and keep this on the brief side. Don't worry, the hour was not a promise. After my update, I'm going to turn it over to Mark Lopez, who's joining me here from East Yard Communities for Environmental Justice, to speak about the meaning of Mono Lake in Los Angeles. Okay. So Mono Lake is indeed located 300 miles from this room, but is closely connected to the City of Los Angeles by the Los Angeles Aqueduct. And this graph shows the decline of the lake due to the diversion of water from its tributary streams. Diversions began back in 1941. And by about 40 years later, the lake had lost half its volume and doubled in salinity, threatening to collapse the ecosystem, creating severe dust storms from thousands of acres of exposed emissive lakebed, and imperiling the cultural heritage and future of the Mono Lake Cusetica tribe, who have lived at Mono Lake since time immemorial. After a number of years and quite a few substantial conflicts, in the 1990s, Mono Lake became famous for landmark win-win solutions for the lake's protection and for LA's local water supply. On this graph here, and there's quite a lot of things on this graph, but if you look at the blue shaded right-hand side of that, that shows the time since the State Water Resources Control Board decision, which has already been discussed here. They reached that decision after extensive analysis and established a healthy lake level requirement. So that was back in 1994, and the 6392-foot management level, you can see marked on there as the horizontal dashed line. And as you can see, the lake has yet to recover to that level. And I'll just note that the level chosen was identified to protect the lake, but also to provide the opportunity for continued water diversions to Los Angeles, recognizing the needs in the city. You can see up higher on the graph what the undiverted lake level would be. So for status update number 1, we do have a low lake problem. Mono Lake is only 35% of the way to the mandated level, and it's a decade overdue in getting there. And this is really connected to ongoing water diversions. Our analysis shows that if there had not been stream diversions since 1994, for example, the lake would actually be quite close to the required level by the end of this year. And I think there was mention earlier of the single year impact of diversions, and it can seem small sometimes, let's say an inch or a couple of inches, but this is a big system. It moves in longer time periods than a single year, and so the key is to look at this from a multi-year approach and look for accumulation of gains and benefits to achieve the final management level. Okay, we've got some good news as well with our historic photo here. We do know what level the lake needs to be at, thanks to the State Water Board. We have a remarkable historical agreement among the Mono Lake parties, many of whom spent a lot of time together in courtrooms and hearing rooms debating the issues. And that agreement is reflected here in this photo, which it was to accept the State Water Board decision and to implement it as the solution for saving Mono Lake. In this photo, you can see former Mayor Richard Reardon, City Council Member Ruth Galanter, LADWP Commission President Dennis Tito, all standing shoulder to shoulder with the Mono Lake Committee, the governor, legislators, agency heads, and other leaders. Martha Davis, who's pictured in the photo and was representing the committee at the time, is here with me today to answer questions about the agreement and the tens of millions of state and federal dollars that came with it to support conservation, water recycling, and local water supply development here in the city. The agreement and the Water Board decision solved a number of problems all at once. There's a roster on the slide I won't walk through, but one example, not only is the mandated lake level ecologically healthy, it will cover enough exposed lake bed to resolve decades of Clean Air Act violations in the Mono Basin. So we've got a mandate to raise the lake, we have an agreement to do so, and we also have a deadline. The State Water Board expected the lake to rise in 20 years, recovering to health in about 2014. So with the lake still far too low, currently, even after this wet winter, the problem before us is implementation. In 2023, the implementation problem is getting a lot of attention. In February, the State Water Board held a workshop on the Low Lake issue, drawing significant public calls for more rapid progress to lake protection, many coming from community groups and citizens here in Los Angeles. I'll just note there were over 3,000 letters received by the State Water Board in that record, the vast majority calling for action to protect the lake. The hearing itself was extended by multiple hours to accommodate the public comment, and I think the Water Board said it was the largest turnout they've had for one of their virtual information workshops ever. The board does plan to hold a formal hearing about stream diversions because its protection requirements have not been fulfilled, and we're waiting to hear about the scheduling on that. We've had a chance to meet with many of you and with your staff members about the challenges at the lake, and in April we appreciated meeting with Deputy Mayor Nancy Sutley to discuss productive paths forward. After reaffirming the need to achieve the 6,392-foot lake level, we identified an opportunity to explore water diversion modification scenarios that would quickly raise the lake while considering years of exceptional water need here in Los Angeles. And so that brings me to my last update. We're currently working with LADWP to launch a joint technical team that will explore and evaluate these diversion scenarios. And that will include, of course, the committee and the department staff, but also representatives from the State Water Board, the California Department of Fish and Wildlife. It will include the Cusetica tribe and others. In fact, Anselmo Collins at LADWP and I were able to meet just 2 days ago and talk about how to set things in motion for that. To wrap up my remarks, let me just share that this is indeed a remarkably wet year. A lot of rain here, a whole lot of snow where I live on the way to dig our way out of. It's going to raise the lake about a third of the way to that management level. Now, recent history shows us that those gains will be lost if outdated aqueduct operations continue. But we can collaborate instead, and we can preserve that progress at Mono Lake and then build on it to reach the management level. We have the year, thanks to the wet conditions, to chart a better path and propose our collaborative solution to the State Water Board before they develop plans of their own. We're eager to move solutions forward quickly and to report back to you on progress made. And I'd like to turn it over to Mark Lopez to speak from his lifetime of commitment to environmental justice in Mono Lake.
Yeah, thank you. So I'm with East Yard Communities for Environmental Justice. We have over 1,000 members on the east side, southeast LA, and the South Bay areas. I've been taking groups up to Mono Lake as a group leader since 2009. But I got to take you back to when I was 9 years old, because that's the first time I actually went and visited Mono Lake. But in order to do that, I got to take you back to the Mothers of East LA, Santa Isabel, which was founded by my grandparents. And so my grandparents talk about how they were at an event, and they were recognized for being the only people on the east side to take advantage of the low flush toilet program. This is in the early 90s. And my grandma didn't appreciate that, because the implication was nobody else in East LA cares about conserving water. This is the early 90s, this is a drought. This is when a lot of our families are experiencing fines for using quote unquote too much water because there wasn't a nuanced assessment to understand that a lot of our homes are multifamily homes. And so our use looks a particular way, right? And so my grandma challenged back that instead of having people pay $300 for a toilet and waiting 3 months to get the rebate back at a time where they might be struggling to put food on the table, it makes sense to give out the toilets for free. And so that's what they did. They were given 3,000 toilets to give out for free over a span of 3 to 6 months, and they put them all out within a month and a half. So they received a couple more thousand, and then a couple more thousand after that, and that program then gets replicated across the city of LA, and because of that, billions of gallons of water have been saved to date, right? Billions of gallons of water. So that's what I grew up with. It was literally my grandma's driveway. Like there's mountains of toilets, and some of the broken toilets, because we were taking the toilets out of homes, you know, went to rebuild freeways in Northridge after the earthquake, right? And that itself is a whole other story. But I think what's important to mention here is that's where the relationship with the Mono Lake Committee and our community starts. Because my grandparents were invited to go visit Mono Lake, right? To start to build a relationship with Mono Lake. But my grandparents knew that if a relationship was to be built between Mono Lake and our communities, it needed to be with our youth, right? It needed to be with our young folks. And so they took a van full of young folks up there and had a great experience, including having a visit from a bear. And the next year, you know, my parents, my brothers, aunts and uncles and cousins and family friends and folks from the neighborhood, we all went up. But my mom said, there's no way I'm gonna stay out in Bear Country, right? And so that was part of the conversation in getting Cane Ranch, DWP property, lent to the Mono Lake Committee. And the next year we do the same, and the next year we do the same, and we continue to do this, and what gets established is a full-fledged program, right? The outdoor education program that at this point has served over 6,000 residents of Los Angeles who have gone up to visit, which is great, but I think, as you heard earlier, the partnership from DWP's end has been very limited, right? I think there's a lot more that can be done for conservancy in the Mono Basin and a lot more that can be done for conservancy in Los Angeles, right? And so I think an assessment needs to happen, and especially an assessment of the need for community-centered conservancy, right? Right now, when you look at DWP's efforts, it's primarily the removal of grass, right? Which communities like ours on the east side that are X-side impacted, that doesn't make sense to us. That can recontaminate us because we still have tons of contaminated soil that needs to be cleaned by the state, right? When you look at the water catchment resources that are offered by DWP, it's basically a trash can with a spigot on it, right? It's not consistent with what our community's opportunities are, right? And our communities are experienced in conserving, on doing more with less, right? And so I think there's a lot of opportunities, especially when we consider the need for resiliency. Whether we're talking about climate resiliency or whether we're talking about catastrophic events, right? Because we know for under-resourced communities, as the least resourced, because we're the most impacted, if any of our essential needs, water, energy, etc., get cut off, our communities are already the most vulnerable, right? And so the imperative to stop relying on imported water, and Mono Lake is imported water. I don't think it's considered that because of the relationship built over the years, but it is imported water, right? The more that we become free of that, the stronger we get in our communities when it comes to resiliency, right? And so all those things are necessary, and I think a deep appreciation for the city council and for the mayor, who have already done a lot of work to just ask questions of DWP, because I think it's brought them to the table in ways that they weren't coming to the table a couple months ago. And that's what we want. We want to create that table, to be able to have these conversations, to be able to drive innovation, and to be able to find solutions. That's ultimately the situation we're in. I think DWP can get very defensive around their rights to the access to water. I think the Mono Lake Committee can get very defensive about defending the lake, right? And I think our communities can really serve as a bridge, because ultimately we're the ones that are being served, right? And so we're the ones that also hold the solutions. Thank you.
Thank you. We'd be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you so much for that presentation. Just a couple of questions for me, and then I'll turn it over to my colleagues. I'm going to ask you the same question I asked DWP. Why do you believe the targeted lake level hasn't yet been achieved?
I think that Adam Perez gave a good answer in terms of the climate change impacts in the Eastern Sierra, producing a more variable and quick whiplash between wet and dry years, longer periods of dryness and drought. Those are patterns that weren't really anticipated in 1994 in the modeling that was done. We have looked to see what the 1994 models expected in terms of overall precipitation, and it was a little bit, a couple percent higher or a couple percent lower than they had modeled, but that's within the normal range of variability. So I think it's really about a management question to address it. It's not it's accommodating how things are changing in the pattern of precipitation.
So from the standpoint of a policymaker overseeing the entirety of DWP, how do you suggest we consider trade-offs among water sources? That is, if we reduce water consumption locally or increase local supply, what do you think should be the prioritization or loading order, to use an energy industry term, of which external sources we no longer import?
Well, that's a great question. We're here from Mono Lake, of course, and we think about our friends in the Owens Valley. I think we've seen a lot of success with local supply projects to date. I know there's some very ambitious goals and a lot of progress being made. I know a lot of the savings that have been accomplished have kind of been put against reducing purchases from Metropolitan Water District, but there's a lot of interest in the Eastern Sierra, certainly in Mono Lake, on when some of those successes in LA will turn to reduced water diversions from the Eastern Sierra, and certainly it curates the case at Mono Lake that relatively small amount of progress on the local supply goals could offset, while the lake rises, the amount that's needed there.
Have you or anyone else conducted a technical analysis of climate change's impact on the Mono Lake ecosystem? And if so, what were some of the key findings? And if not, if that study hasn't been done, why hasn't it been done yet?
The Water Board really did the big multi-year technical study of the ecosystem, salinity, the connection of lake health, and so forth. It was on the early side of giving significant consideration to climate change. It was early 1990s. So that hasn't been repeated, is the answer. It's a good question. There are some ecological mysteries at Mono Lake these days that seem like they might be connected to water temperatures or things like that. But we are asked about climate change, and I do think some of the fundamentals at Mono Lake are unchanged. So the salinity level at which the brine shrimp and alkali flies that are the base of the ecosystem are productive, for example, hasn't changed due to climate change. The relationship between lake level and salinity hasn't changed. The location of the emissive areas that are the cause of the dust storms hasn't changed. So I would certainly embrace doing those studies because we want to know as much as we can about what's happening in the present day. I think we've got a pretty good grip on the benefits of the management level still that the State Water Board established.
Thank you. Just one more question. What do you see as the longer-term issues, given the wider swings in precipitation levels we can anticipate across the state, but especially in the Eastern Sierras?
I think for Mono Lake, and it'll be true for the Eastern Sierra, those swings are going to create more years of shortage and then more years of such great abundance like this one that it's a very big challenge to manage all of that snowmelt and runoff. I know Adam and the team up in Bishop are working really hard to deal with that right now, and so it's a question of how to run the aqueduct in a different time frame. It's a question of how to manage resources like Mono Lake in that different pattern as well. I think from the lake perspective, Knowing there's going to be swings, we really want to see the lake up at that management level because it creates the buffer, if you will, the space, the ability as a lake to handle a multi-year drought. It's going to go down some, but it's not going to go down to precipitous, calamitous levels.
Thank you. Colleagues?
Wondered whether you could talk a little bit about your relationship with DWP. What are the formal and informal ways that you communicate and collaborate with the department?
Sure. We have been, 40-plus years all working together, and maybe Martha can even comment on some of the historical perspective on it. We work together on quite a lot of projects. I think that it's very helpful that we have the State Water Board requirements that are all part of the water license because they do provide clear guidance on what needs to happen. We have a variety of levels of engagement. We might be working with Marty Adams and Anselmo and commissioners here on policy things, but we have folks on our technical staff that are looking at the daily flow changes on one of the creeks and communicating with the DWP team about what's happening, and just something seems a little funny, what is that, and resolving things like that. One area that's, I went past quickly, but it's worth coming back to is the stream restoration program. So within the State Water Board's requirements, Mono Lake is what we're talking about, but there's a significant set of requirements for restoration of the damage done on about 20 miles of streams that are below the water diversion points and between the lake and the water diversion points. And we've really made tremendous progress on those, and we're working together to implement a new set of stream ecosystem flows that came through collaboration and discussion and proposing back to the State Water Board about a decade ago a plan for how to move that science analysis into reality in a way that worked for aqueduct operations, in a way that would benefit the ecosystem. And so that's one of the examples of really good successes of working together.
It's been a fantastic collaboration with the Department of Water and Power right after the 1994 decision of really trying to figure out additional ways in which we could save water and improve water. I would call it both resilient, but in those days we called it more about flexibility. Recognizing that LA really benefits when we have more water supplies developed here in our backyards. And there's so much work that has gone forward. Of course, the conservation program has been tremendous success. The 44% that Mr. Perez referenced, that's over 200,000 acre-feet less than what we were using in 1994. That's huge. Actually, it goes back to 1970. So in so many ways, we've created the, basics of a water supply strategy here for Los Angeles for resilience, but then moving forward now to invest in the San Fernando groundwater basin and that whole cleanup. That's huge. You have one of the biggest groundwater basins in Southern California, and making sure that we have access to it and it has clean water. And then on top of that, looking at all of your recycled water projects, and on top of that, what you can capture for stormwater. LA has some of the richest water opportunities in all of California. And the work that's been going forward over the last 20, 30 years to take advantage of those opportunities, we have a great start, and there's so much more we can be doing that builds up our resilience and creates the flexibility so that instead of looking at imported and local water supplies as a trade-off against one another, what we really need to be investing is the flexibility so that we're protecting resilience for both the source water that comes from imported areas and the water resilience here in Los Angeles.
All right. Thank you so much. Really appreciate it. Appreciate you being here. Looking forward to a tour.
Thank you very much.
Summer's a great time to visit.
Turning now to item 2. CLA, would you please read the item?
Item number 2 is a Los Angeles Department of Water and Power reports relative to the bi-weekly update on competitive proposals or bidding were not reasonably practical.
Wonderful. I'll invite Mr. Perez from DWP back up to the table to address this item. Welcome back, Mr. Perez. Long time no see.
That was a short time sitting on the other side, so.
A short presentation would be wonderful.
Yes,
Thank
so
you.
it's another, okay, this one I do have a presentation. I know this is a very important item. And let's see, get that queued up. Oh, there it is. And I will get into the question in regards to the suspension of the competitive bidding. But I also want to tell the overall story of kind of what we've been dealing with since March. Talk about overall the expectations of the forecast of the runoff, and then talk about how we've benefited already right now because of the mayor's declaration and the work that's done from the council level. So this is a great picture. This is our Pleasant Valley reservoir facility, and what you see there is about 500 to 600 CFS coming over a spillway, and that was done basically in this March event. And I'll go to the next slide here. Yeah. So, and this is just a hydrograph. I know it's a technical kind of aspect, but I just wanted to show overall the spike in the overall flow coming through the system. And this is essentially this March storm. And ahead of this March storm, what we had was a significant amount of precipitation all the way from December, January, and February. And then overall, coming into March, we had a very warm snow system come through the Eastern Sierra. And what it did is it did what they call a rain on snow event. And what that did is it impacted the overall the infrastructure to the aqueduct and created an overall spike. And so that biggest spike there, you can see it's at 1,100 CFS of water through one of our measuring gauging stations in the overall aqueduct, which is a considerable amount of water in a short period of time. And then you can just kind of see here what it caused. This is a flume is what we use to measure the water coming off of our creeks in our system. And you can see with that much water in that short a period of time inundated the whole kind of the overall some of our infrastructure. And so you can see the water kind of running around it, and then overall the sediment building up behind it. But most impactfully is this picture here. I think this is probably one of the first documented sort of release or kind of full collapse of the aqueduct. And this is what they call the lined section of the aqueduct. We had so much water coming down off of the watershed. It built up so much seepage pressure behind those concrete panels that it pushed the concrete panels into the aqueduct. So this is a full breach of the system. You can kind of see here we had to drain the aqueduct. And by draining the aqueduct, then we had essentially 70 to 80 DWP forces who basically worked 24/7 to restore the overall city supply to the city of Los Angeles. So it was a really, really big project. And it just, for me, it's a bit of an accomplishment, and just the work that was done, dedication by the staff up in the Owens Valley. Within 4 days, we were able to get and restore full aqueduct supply back to the city. And this is overall just showing that patch. So this, again, is the overall story of we've been dealing with already a major incident. Again, that was that March storm, which then goes into now the forecast. And what you can see here is that red line. We've been tracking that red line. You can kind of see that green line there. That's 2017. That was the recently one of the wettest periods we had within the overall aqueduct. But that red line, we were tracking fairly well. We're coming off of 3 years of drought, so we were all real happy to see some positive gains in regards to precipitation in the Eastern Sierra. But quickly, the gains started to just show themselves to be very impactful. And right now, what you can see there is that number is 303% of normal, and that number there is based on snow pillow numbers. There's a number there called 296, which again, that's off of snow surveys. We have hydrographers which go, this one here. We have hydrographers within the Owens Valley, and they do snow surveys. They do them basically January, February, March, and April. This is one of and what they do is that you can see them here. This is on a City of Los Angeles owned snowcat, so I think it's a kind of a cool piece of equipment. But what they have there is that's a tube, and that tube is driven into the snow to get the overall depth and impacts in that snowpack. And that tube right there is 23 feet long. So this is basically when they did this, and based on the overall information, that 290%, not 96% of normal, that is the highest amount of precipitation and expectation that we have basically seen on record since 1969. In fact, this year we are looking at roughly 10 to 15% more than what they managed in 1969. I didn't want to throw any of the historic photos from 1969, but in 1969, there was significant damage to the overall aqueduct. Again, this is just an overall pretty picture, but this is showing the amount of snow in our Long Valley complex. This is right there above, right as you enter from Inyo County to Mono County. This is the largest city supply that is available in regards to overall within the Eastern Sierra, and that is 184,000 acre-feet of water, but you can't see it because it is completely, there is an ice layer over the reservoir as well as about 3 to 4 feet of snow on top of the reservoir. So quite significant. This is just, I just want to talk through real quick in regards to what we are currently already kind of seeing. And these numbers, I apologize, they need to be updated, but right now it shows PV to Tittamaha, and that's just an overall flow within the aqueduct. It says 360. Actually, that number is over 1,000 CFS. We have right now, another number there is showing our number from our Lower Owens River project over through into our Owens Lake facility, and that shows 370. Actually, the number is more like 700 to 800 CFS. So currently, the one benefit that I can say that we, in regards to our snowpack and what we have been managing in regards to runoff, the overall very cool spring, I know it's here in Los Angeles as well, it's been a very cool temperatures that we've seen pretty much through May and now into June. It's been the same up in the Eastern Sierra. So that basically cooling trend has also benefited us because we are not seeing these big, huge flows come down. Even though I just talked about these flows, those are in a way sort of manageable. But we are expecting within the next 10 days temperatures to rise in the Owens Valley, probably getting into the over 100 degrees Fahrenheit marks for 3 to 4 days. That was when we significantly expect to see the most amount of water coming through the system and impacting us. Yes, yes. We've, thank you. We've at this point, we have put, since December, as these numbers started to rise, we have implemented lots of work to overall bring our forces with developing our spreading grounds and able to spread the water out in the Owens Valley, because one of the key things is that the water from the Owens Valley, we have the aqueduct, that is water going to the city, but we have ways in which if the stream flow overwhelms the system, we are able to spread the water and divert it and also use it within the Owens Valley. And that's to the benefit of the overall health of the Owens Valley as well. So I just going to go really quick in regards into the declaration, and this has kind of been the key piece and has really helped us out. I'll talk through it quickly, but then I'll go quickly through a couple of examples and how this has benefited us. So when you look at it, the overall declaration was on March 14th. Mayor Bass and the City Council, she basically was declared on March 14th and adopted by Council on the 21st. What it did is that competitive bidding was suspended by the Council on the 21st. It also gave authority to our GM for overall approval of some of our contracts that are needed to get through this emergency. And overall, there's reports that are provided every 2 weeks, and that's what we basically is talking through, is to make sure that things are done in accordance with making sure the processes are followed correctly and appropriately. And we come back to the council every 30 days for extension of this declaration. So those are how we're also managing it. And then also within DWP, we have our own processes, because up through my supervisor, all the way up to Ensemble Collins, Marty Adams, they review and want to make sure that things are being done accordingly as well. These contracts have been really important. Overall, they've been used for construction services, materials, equipment rentals, professional services. And overall, right now, when you kind of look at it, the main use of these services and contracts have really been to this preventative measures, trying to get ourselves prepared for overall this runoff. Like I mentioned, and you saw those we're essentially higher than the highest amount of precipitation that has ever been recorded within our documentation going back to about 1913. So we haven't seen it yet. I think it's coming in about 10 days. And so I want to talk to you real quick in regards to this project here. And this is what we call the Tittamaha Siphon Project. Again, this is just, We have several projects that we basically have utilized the declaration for, but I want to highlight these two. So this is the Tinnemaha siphon, and what it is we've working with a local, well, not local, but it's a contractor, Rain for Rent. We've implemented a siphon system to overall increase the outlet capacity out of Tinnemaha Reservoir. Tinnemaha Reservoir is a very important reservoir within the midsection of the aqueduct. And overall what a siphon kind of is essentially is you have a passive system. It's a 30-inch pipeline made out of HDPE, but I say passive in that there's no need for motors and things to drive the water over. You're basically, I'm not saying everybody's done this, but you siphon out gas, you suck on the little plastic tube and you create the siphon. Overall, it's the same thing, but essentially you're just balancing it off with the reservoirs. And so you have one side of elevation on the what they call the upstream side of the reservoir, and then on the downstream side, which you're viewing here, you have then this drop, and that drop allows this siphon to basically be created. And all you have to do is prime the siphon. And what that did here is allowed us to get 500 to 600 CFS added capacity out of that reservoir, which will essentially help us when we have to see all those added water coming through into the system. So it's a really big deal, and it's a really great, we're able to, from concept to implementation, less than 30 days, drive this project. So it was a very significant part. Having the declaration was a key piece of that. Another aspect is related to Owens Lake. Now, Owens Lake is really a dust mitigation project, but within the aqueduct system, Mulholland created, and basically within the overall infrastructure, ways, and he kind of realized that at certain periods of time, there will be a need to basically manage the water and divert it away from the aqueduct for emergency purposes. And Owens Lake happens to be the perfect spot for that, because with the way it's situated, you're able to, they put in a couple what they call spill gates. And these spill gates are emergency spill gates. You're able to divert water away from the aqueduct into Owens Lake. What you see in that dark photo there, the kind of with that darker blue, that is in 1969. And that was the overall level of water that was diverted from the aqueduct into Owens Lake. What you see to the right is now we have $2.5 billion worth of infrastructure, dust control areas within Owens Lake. And what we've done is you can see how much the color changes. That's all based on a forecast of the impacts based on how much water is diverted to Owens Lake. And what we're expecting and forecasting is that when this, in 10 days, 15 days, when we see these peak flows, there's going to be basically a significant impact on the overall Owens Lake. We call it the brine pool. And to the yellow mark there, that's about 200,000 acre-feet of water. Right now, we're expecting about 170,000 acre-feet of water to impact our Owens Lake facility. Again, I mentioned there's a significant amount of infrastructure placed and built into it in these dust control areas to manage dust at Owens Lake. So, and you can see there that initial cost, so basically for the improvements, is $20 to $30 million per square mile for overall the significant impacts to rebuild this infrastructure based on if we were to get inundated. So that comes into, again, is, well, then what are we doing now, right? To try to protect these things, and that's, again, coming into the declaration, utilizing the non-competitive bidding aspect of it, we were able to bring on a contractor to come in and to help support and develop ways and mitigation efforts to make sure that we can try to get through some of these things related to this aspect of flooding of Owens Lake. So you can kind of see here to the side here, we've added in, protected the submains, and there's sandbags, and there's some geotextiles. We've also placed berms around some of our key infrastructure at the lake. We've added in monitoring. We've added in riprap. We've also shored up a couple of the key access roads. Here you can kind of see they're building and adding elevation to some of these berms, sandbags. So these are all things that are being done, and very importantly, to help overall to mitigation measures because of the anticipation of the overall amount of water that we expect for this overall runoff, which I kind of explained. So I know that was quick, but I just wanted to just provide some background of kind of what we've been working through, what we expect, and overall how we've utilized some of the declaration and getting to this point.
Thank you very much, Mr. Perez. I want to thank you and all the staff who were working around the clock to make this happen. I know it was Herculean. Couple of questions. So the report on the emergency declaration showed an estimated budget of $33 million worth of contracts. DWP's already awarded or amended contracts valued at nearly $38 million outside of the competitive solicitation process, and it's resulted in, my understanding is 7.6 miles of berm slope installed so far. The report also showed that DWP needs a total of 14 berm miles of berm slope to mitigate flooding. It's almost double what's been delivered so far. Given the ongoing melts throughout the summer, I'm curious about your estimate as to when work is going to be completed.
Thank you for that question, because what's going to really drive this is going to be, in a way, the runoff is kind of, in a way, it's not predictable. It's also not predictable to levels of damage over the next few months. And so we've taken the protective measures to get to this point, and we have utilized the numbers as you've kind of talked through, and we have forecasted a certain number of expectations. But I think coming into September, October, that's when we'll have the true understanding of really kind of where we're at. Because basically at the end here, we're going to essentially, like I mentioned, the water's going to flow through the system. And how it comes through, if it's certain creeks, if there's another situation where we get storms, seeded clouds that end up going to some of these canyons, all these things could really drive forward and really potentially could damage the infrastructure. In that case, these contracts will be really, really important to reestablish the city supply from the aqueduct.
Do you anticipate the work on the berm being done this summer, or?
Yes, we
So,
do. Yeah.
great. And do you have a sense of what the revised budget for completing the emergency repairs is going to look like?
Again, it's an estimate. I think we were at $44 million at this point, but those numbers will probably be revised depending on, again, how lucky or how unlucky we get here coming into this runoff period.
Wonderful. Colleagues, any questions? Councilwoman Hernandez.
Thank you, Chairwoman. Question, for invoicing, about half of the work has been completed, but only about 15% of the cost has been invoiced. Is there an anticipated savings with this project, or is the money expected to be fully expended?
Again, it's expectations. I think in regards to right now with our prime contract that we have for protections of Owens Lake, I think that money will be expended fully. But in regards to other aspects related to it, there could be some savings depending on exactly the situation that we end up in regards to the runoff and how it impacts the system.
Great, thank you so much. Thank you, Chairwoman.
Councilman Blumenfield.
How do you make the determination about when to reinstate the competitive bidding?
To reinstate?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think for right now, it is based on, because, for example, this contract that we were able to get for protections of Owens Lake, the typical process is about 1.5 years to get that contractor in and to do that work. And we were able to do that within several months. So, and again, it's trying to prepare ourselves, know what we have. I think at a certain point, yes, I think we can go back to, the process of going back to our normal competitive bid process. But I think the ability and the flexibility probably needs to be in place, I would say, at least until September, October, because I think, again, it's getting through the runoff, but then it's also impacts of the runoff. And then how can we then, again, it could be impacts to the system, trying to restore those in a timely manner to make sure we have the city supply back restored from the aqueduct. Again, the aqueduct supply this year is expected to be 85 to 90% of the overall city supply. That we would like to take that benefit for the city rather than having to purchase water from the state water system or from the Colorado system. We have the water this year. We've had drought conditions. Last year was a very poor water year. We have the water this year, so it's really to the benefit of us and through the DWP and the city of Los Angeles to make sure to work towards bringing as much water as we can from the Eastern Sierra into the city.
How much of our efforts these days are directed toward the short term, dealing with these immediate problems versus the long term infrastructure?
I think right now, what we're focusing on is the preventative measures. Again, we are looking at Owens Lake is one of the big ones, but again, these siphons, and there's other projects and other things that we're looking. So we're really not looking at the overall I guess the bigger picture types of projects.
Right.
We haven't put those 100% on our radar because we're just trying to understand, again, exactly what we would be dealing with come in a few months. So unfortunately, right now, it is a short-sighted view of it. But I think come August, again, at that point, we will then have a better understanding, better picture, and then we can plan some of these longer projects to make sure that we can ensure and secure the supply to the city.
Great. Thank you.
Yeah.
Councilmember McCosker.
Does it make sense in future, I realize the emergency now and the need for emergency services and setting aside formal bidding, but does it make sense to think about for future years, bidding out, as needed, on-call emergency services, and having a slate of folks that have been that have gone through the charter provisions and been selected and waiting to deploy, or is that unreasonable?
I don't think it's unreasonable at all. I think, of course, we need to balance off the workforce in the city of Los Angeles. I do have a substantial workforce, over 300 employees within the aqueduct system alone. Need to balance off, their overall time, their expertise, as well as bringing in consultants to shore up some of these areas. So I think those things can happen. I just think it has to balance off with overall internal labor as well as bring in contractual labor to make sure we can secure the infrastructure and make sure we can have that reliable supply from the aqueduct. I think there's definitely a need when it comes down to it. When you look at the overall aging infrastructure of the aqueduct, there should be a discussion, and we are having these discussions about balancing our own internal forces with outside forces to make sure, again, for the security of the overall infrastructure and the supply.
And I would imagine for our internal forces, for our labor partners, they would, if we have to go outside, they'd probably prefer to see a noticed, bidding process rather than a quick emergency.
100%. It would go through, the labor unions and
Yep.
notice of compliance and all those things that would be the way to manage that. And in working with them and understanding that if we were to do this, I think there'd be showing that there would still be enough work for the overall, the forces that are currently in place, as well as balancing off a future work to make sure for securing these things. So I think it would just be some great conversations to have with the labor partners to make sure we can get this handled and managed.
Yeah, because our system's not getting any younger,
It's
and
not.
Fluctuations will continue to happen. It's probably something to think about for the future.
I will tell you, these droughts with these booming water years are putting significant pressure on the aqueduct. What it does is there's unlined sections. It creates major erosion, and then what happens as the water drops for some of the dry years, some of those you start to collapse the aqueduct. So there's all these different aspects related to how we are going to protect our dams, our reservoirs. Again, this is the safest, affordable, reliable supply for the city. It's how we can protect it, and I think it's working through getting some of these agreements in place and looking at how we can plan these projects out is very, very important.
Thank you.
All right, thank you very much.
Oh, thank
for
you.
being here. Seeing no more question, let's vote to note and file this item. Mr. Clerk, would you please call the roll?
Councilmember Yaroslavsky,
Yes.
Councilmember McCosker,
Yes.
Councilmember Rahman. Councilmember Rahman,
Oh, yes.
Councilmember Blumenfield,
Aye.
Councilmember Hernandez. Have 5 aye votes, and the item is noted and filed, Madam Chair.
Wonderful. Thank you. That concludes our agenda. Mr. Clerk, are there any other items before us today?
I just want to, for clarification, item 5 is being continued.
5 is being continued. Thank you. Thanks, everyone. Before we wrap up, I want to thank Josh Nooney, one of Councilwoman Rahman's senior staff who supported her in this role on this committee and elsewhere. It's a loss for the city, but I'm excited for you on your next big thing. I'll also note that we're going to be in recess next month. We'll reconvene here in August. With that, everyone have a great weekend.